Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Swiss Cyber Forum. This is our next webinar session at Swiss Cyber Forum, and we are pleased to have you here today. As you know, month of October is International Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we are pleased to host several webinars and on-site events during this month in Zurich, in Switzerland. And we have a very special guest today, who is Daniel Seiler. Daniel Seiler is one of the best cybersecurity and privacy experts I know in Switzerland. He is a good friend of mine. And right now, Daniel is Deputy Head of Office of Cyber, Foreign and Security Policy Department at Federal Department of Foreign Affairs in Bern. Also, he is a lecturer of IoT devices, AI, social media, and privacy at University of St. Gallen. And Daniel is expert in law, technology, policymaking, and cyber diplomacy. For housekeeping, before we start our webinar, you can use Q&A button on the bottom of your windows to ask your questions. And Daniel will start his presentation after several minutes. Last 15 minutes we will use for questions and answers. Please welcome to our webinar and send us your questions, and we will record this session for our social media purpose. Also, right now we are also live on YouTube. You can also invite your friends or colleagues to watch us on YouTube channel, on our YouTube channel. Daniel, welcome to our session, and I am very, very pleased to have you. Thank you very much for your time. You have prepared great presentation, and I'm also super excited to hear about more on Swiss perspective on cyber diplomacy. As we know, Switzerland is a neutral country in the world, and there's huge development right now to be the lead country in cyber diplomacy in the world. And yeah, please start your presentation, and thanks again. And hopefully we will have a lot of questions at the end of the session.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. And it's always a pleasure. Such a nice introduction. That means it can only get worse now. But so welcome everybody. I can see on the audience some names I know. So special warm welcome to all the people I know personally. Today I'm here to talk about cyber diplomacy. I give you only a brief overview. It's a topic we could have a webinar for a whole week, I would say. But let's start with the basics, and I will share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. If ever you have questions, please let me know. And please interact, and Samir, perhaps you can help me a little bit to see if there's something going on in the chat.
Sure, I will inform you if there's any quick question.
Great, and please feel free to ask questions. There are no silly questions, and I try my best to find an answer for your question. So as Samir told you already, I'm working in the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, so Außenministerium in Switzerland, and there is the Office of the Special Envoy for Cyber, Foreign and Security Policy. I give you some background on that is existing about 2 years, so it's a rather new structure for a topic that is, of course, also emerging. And there, I'm the deputy head. We have different things to do, and I will go into that a bit later because I want to show you today a short introduction what it is about. Why do we talk about cyber diplomacy? What does that mean, and where does that come from on a Swiss perspective? What is the basis, also some sort of legal basis for that? Then what is the mission? What is the mission of cyber diplomacy on a Swiss perspective in general? And what does the Office of the Special Envoy do in that regard? Because that's, of course, very much connected. What are the main topics, content-wise, what it is about, and what are the challenges? This should give you a brief overview about what it is about topics and challenges. Of course, then I cannot cover everything and each and every aspect. As you also know, in the diplomatic world, not everything is for disclosure. However, a lot is public, and I will share all that with you. And in the end, we have time for Q&A, of course, and don't hesitate to reach out to me. So let's get started, I would say. Swiss cyber diplomacy, where does that come from? Is that just a buzzword? Is that something that was just invented by me? It is not, but it is a good idea. So you have two main bases where you can find aspects of Swiss cyber diplomacy and digital diplomacy, let's say, also because that's a bit the same word. First, it's Switzerland's foreign policy strategy from 2020 to 2023. That's always in a 4-year terms. It's defined. That is nothing that is secret. You can Google that and you can download it in different languages. There you will find a specific chapter for digital world, and that is new. We never had in such a foreign policy strategy anything that's like a chapter just for digital and cyber itself. So that is new. And that shows, I think, very clearly that this is a field of action that is new and that has now a certain level of attention and importance. Therefore, it's there. So to wrap up, what is in this foreign policy strategy is actually the mission or the idea, the strategy that Switzerland will raise its profile in this global world, in the governance of digitalization, that it gets more visibility, more action, and that Switzerland develops its digital foreign policy further and is positioning Geneva as the location, as the leading location for such debates around digital and technological topics. Why is that Geneva? As you may know, in Geneva we have quite a lot of international bodies already. There are UN bodies, so from the United Nations, but also others like the International Telecommunication Union has offices there. So we have already quite a lot of players in Geneva, and Geneva is a place where we want that such topics like digitalization, technology, cyber, which are more and more politically, can be discussed and debated on a neutral ground. And we think Switzerland is very fit for that purpose, and it's very suitable, and is also known for its services and its position and geographic position in that regard. And therefore, this is one of the goals to have such discussions here in Switzerland. And I think for us as a country, for Switzerland, that is not only just nice to have, that's also very important. As Samir told in the introduction, cybersecurity and the cyber domain is getting more and more important, more international. There are a lot of superpowers that are engaging in that domain. And that's very obvious. Switzerland, also very obvious, is not a superpower in that regard. But having and hosting such debates and being the location for such debates gives us a very good standing and gives us opportunities to engage very directly and very efficiently, also if we are actually a rather small country, and also in terms of digitalization, we are certainly not the main players. However, this will give us the opportunity to be a player as well, and I think that's very important. As a lot of you, I think, are in the cyber and cybersecurity domain already, you potentially know our national cyber strategy that is here quite a long time already, since 2018 actually, and it will last until 2022. Here it's the second version of it, so 2.0, and we're already working on the version 3. Of course, the national cyber strategy actually defines what we as a country and Switzerland does in the terms of active cyber diplomacy. We have 3 different packages of measures in the action plan. There's an implementation or action plan of this strategy. Also this both available freely on the web. You will even find it in English if you want, and French, German, and Italian. There you can find the implementation plan, which is actually some sort of a project plan where you see different packages of measures. And there are 3 of such packages. It's number 24, 26, and 27 that actually define what Switzerland has to do on an international level. For example, being part of the discussions at a UN level, or engaging in OECD, or working in the field of capacity building. Just some examples, and it's quite specific already in this plan. So that's not just a strategy where you find very high level ideas, which may be nice, but no one knows how to implement it. So in the implementation plan, you find quite some detail how that is done and by whom. And if you read through the measures 25 to 27, you will find that the Office of the Special Envoy for Cyber and Cyber Foreign and Security Policy as the main stakeholder being in charge to implement those measures. Okay, in more general, perhaps not covering each and every aspect that could be, but cyber diplomacy, what is a field of action at all? Or the more easy question I'm also asked sometimes is, what do you do actually? What is that cyber diplomacy? What topics are those? Because cyber and diplomacy those both terms seem not really to work together. And that's actually pretty right. Long time, technology and diplomacy were worlds that were not a lot connected. One diplomat even said to me about a year ago that when you begin to talk about technology, then the diplomats will leave the room. I'm not sure if that is true. However, it shows that there is some disconnection, or there was some disconnection, and certainly this is something important to tackle, because the world is digital, and therefore diplomacy also needs to reflect that to some extent. And so we try to bring those worlds together, and this means we need to scope what fields of action, what topics are really important and which are playing a major role. And this is, of course, digital technologies overall. That can be from application of such technologies, that there may be discussion about economy, there may be discussion about ethics, there may be discussion about like privacy, data protection when using digital technology. Think about social media, for example. But also more fundamental, it's human rights. Human rights is something for most of us, it's very abstract, it's very high level. You do not really know how to what that means in this specific domain. But human rights, for example, in cyberspace, is freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Is how do we tackle that? Because the human rights in the analog world, in the physical world, are at least pretty much clear to every country and in the diplomatic field. However, in the digital world, the human rights cannot just be copy-pastes. Switzerland actually shares, of course, the view that human rights also apply in cyberspace, and that is certainly, I think, the right approach. One issue is, what does that mean? What does that actually? What is actually the impact? And then I show you some, perhaps, of those examples a bit later. Connected with the human rights is international law in general. How that does apply in cyberspace. Actually, the if is some sort of resolve 2015 in the working group from the UN and the group of governmental experts, so-called GGE. It is found that international law applies in cyberspace. So that is almost 5 years ago. And now one of the ongoing topics is very obvious, is what does that mean? How? So now we know that it applies in cyberspace. How does it apply in cyberspace, and what does that mean? Something, of course, that is also a field of action and a topic very often, as very obvious, is cybercrime. We have a lot of different aspects of cybercrime. It goes to prevention, detection, it goes to awareness, it goes to international collaboration with the different police forces. For example, that's, of course, something, I think that's more understandable that this is a topic when different countries talk to each other. And something we are just all having sessions this week in the Singapore Cyber Week, and also at the Trust Valley event this week in Lausanne, is what is actually responsible behavior in cyberspace. And here we do not talk about behavior or responsible behavior of private individuals, but more what is responsible behavior in cyberspace of states and of like companies, so the economy. What are, let's say, perhaps not the rules in terms of law, but what are norms, what is our best practices? There we have some very direct engagement I will show you later, and I think that's pretty much promising and will get us to a next step. Capacity building is something that's very broad. Capacity building is something that means empowering people, states, companies to act in the cyberspace, to know how it works, to know about its governance, to know about possibilities you have. That has technological aspects, it has, but also more legal aspects, and also more some of, let's say, more operational aspects. So that is something we are also engaged in, and where I think that is a long journey to go. For example, one question is also, you may have heard it when you are in the cyber domain, is the awareness of the management for cybersecurity. How much is that evolved? Or in the most cases I saw is that it is not so much evolved, and that means we need more capacity, more knowledge. Confidence building measures is has to do with trust, but not with digital trust. Actually, it's very normal trust. That's something means building confidence between states and between different state actors. I'll show you later what that means. And in the end, a very specific topic for Switzerland is the good services online, die guten Dienste. That is what Switzerland does in the diplomatic field, especially between countries, for example, that do not have diplomatic relationships between each other, and we help to do that. And now the question would be, how can that be done or performed? How can those good services be performed in an online world? So that's just a short overview. Now, mission, what we do with we, what do I mean? I do mean Switzerland and our cyber office. Yeah, first, you almost heard it, I think. We are leading and shaping Switzerland's cyber diplomacy as a policy, as a process, an internal process and an external process. We make sure that Switzerland's interests are represented in the different international bodies. It goes from the UN, it goes to OECD, it goes to other bodies like the Geneva Dialogue on responsible behavior in internet, in cyberspace. There we engage and make sure that Switzerland's interest and Switzerland's views and also our values are part of the discussion. And this strikes a bit back to what I said in the beginning. You see here why it could also be important that such discussions are done in Geneva, in Switzerland. What is also one of the, or two of the topics that I'm specifically also very much involved in is the positioning. It may sometimes sound easy to find a position in a specific topic. Let's name, for example, cybercrime. But if you need to formulate a position that is valid for the country as a whole of government approach, how we call it, then you have to talk to a lot of different governmental bodies, to federal offices, from the army to the federal police to the Office for Justice. And to put this together is pretty challenging, and means also for me that's always a good opportunity to do internal capacity building, because you can only have a position about something you understand, of course, and therefore we put this together. So I mix it always a bit to make some sort of awareness and capacity building, and by doing this, finding out what is our view, what is our position, what do we want to do. And what's important here to know, sometimes I'm asked, what is the general position of Switzerland regarding cybercrime, and such. And general questions, of course, extremely complicated to answer, because there are so many aspects. And be also sure and aware that in the different bodies where Switzerland is represented, often very specific questions are discussed, and therefore positioning, a specific positioning to such question is crucial, of course. What I do, and what I also really much like to do, is identification of new technology and trends, technological trends and digital challenges, new software, new services, new technology. Like at the moment, I'm doing a lot with quantum cryptography, about also AI. Samir, yeah, he told you about that. He knows some of my lectures, and he knows it can get intense. Yesterday we talked about ethics and AI, and I mean, that's such a lot of interesting topics. And in the end, it's pretty much a challenge to find out, okay, now what does that mean for Switzerland? How important is that for Switzerland as a country, for our foreign policy, perhaps even for our domestic policy? What does that mean? What is truly the challenge? What is a trend? Should we go for it? Should we not? Should we wait? And what does that mean? How does it impact different aspects of our policy, of our bodies, or does it even impact our strategy? Do we need to rewrite some parts? And I think that's something, well, I would say pretty challenging. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of time, but it's also, I think, that what we really need, especially because Switzerland is very much not only known, but is really a very innovative country. And there we have a lot of trends that are homemade, let's say, so homebrew trends, and that can even impact trends in the whole world. And there I find it specifically motivating to do that and to see what that can mean. And here, one of the other challenges is then, despite of understanding what is going on and finding out what is potentially the impact, is then we come back to the diplomatic world. How do you frame this, and how do you communicate this to people that are potentially pretty far away of such very specific technological topics? So, talking about topics, what are main topics in my view, in our view? You find that also to some parts in the different strategy documents I mentioned, in the cyber strategy and in also the foreign policy strategy. I scoped it out. I put it together on a very short points. So don't blame me if that's not totally complete, but I thought I will show you the most important ones. I put them together with in some groups. As already mentioned, human rights. That's why I bring it for the first. It's very fundamental. It influences a lot of other topics. And a very important message we have, something we promote, and perhaps an important takeaway for you, is Switzerland, and also, of course, our cyber office, we promote the free, secure, open, and rule-based cyberspace. Free for everyone, secure in terms of you may securely use it. Open means inclusion, not exclude someone. And rule-based means that it is not about the stronger sets the rules, but the rules are done with inclusion, with everyone, and is respected by everyone, and it's rule-based, so it generates trust. Of course, freedom of speech online, that is also something we promote. That is why we joined the so-called Freedom Online Coalition last year, where we engage in various topics that go to freedom of speech online, which also includes a lot of capacity building, a lot of webinars, a lot of different empowerment activities to really promote that. So talking about something is one thing, and really promoting it is of course something different. And what we also do is capacity building in terms of human rights in cyberspace. That means we do workshops specifically for countries that want to be part of this whole, let's say, governance of cyberspace, specifically on the UN level. Perhaps they do not know at the moment how they can engage, what topics are there, and also in terms of very formalistic questions, how they can join such discussions, how that works, when such discussion will be, what are the topics, how can they get invited, and all this. This is also capacity building, because we have the view that the governance and the cyberspace, if you want to govern that, the better that take part and discuss, the more they discuss in this group, the better. And of course, if there are countries or representatives that do not actually know that such discussions take place, or how to engage in such discussions, that's of course a pity. And by doing capacity building in that field, we want to enable all of them to be part of it and to engage actively and to share their views and ideas. Then, I mean, that is really a central part for diplomacy. I think that will not impress you a lot or surprise you a lot. We do dialogues. We, by the way, just had a so-called cyber dialogue with the US end of July in a hybrid form because of COVID. However, we have other bilateral dialogues. What does that mean? That means that we, Switzerland, talk with another country. That means we have delegations. Then we share what topics we find important, and we define perhaps some follow-up activities. We do the so-called Senior European Cyber Dialogue and the MENA Cyber Dialogue. Those are dialogues that are more geographically focused. We feel that specifically in the Asian area, there are not so many, let's say, bodies or forums where some sort of knowledge exchange on a level, on a governmental level happens. We want to take the lead there. This year was not easy to do such dialogues, of course, because of the COVID situation. However, it showed that doing dialogues online and virtually is sometimes even empowering the inclusiveness, because there's no long and expensive travel needed, and it makes it more accessible for different representatives, which I think is actually a good takeaway from this horrible COVID-19 situations. And here, good services online, I brought it back here to that slide, is in these dialogues, of course, we can also approach such topics, like if other countries share with us they have issues with another third country, that we may try to find a solution there by being the messenger, for example, or by being the mailbox, or by being the one that arranges a round table. There can be very different things we do there. Yeah, of course, national cyber strategy is an important topic. You'll perhaps ask yourself why, because now that's foreign policy, and now it's national cyber strategy. That's very much connected. No surprise. What we do is actually the implementation of the cyber strategy. You heard perhaps that since July, we have a National Cybersecurity Center, NCSC. That is a new, let's say, a new body. All these people working there existed before, but they were now regrouped to another body. We have a close collaboration with them actually daily. On a daily basis, we have knowledge exchange and operational exchange. That's all new. They are hiring a lot of people. We as well are hiring for next year. So setting up, I mean, most of you work at different companies. Setting up new structures is something that needs to be done throughout the strategy, and something that is pretty challenging to find talent and to build up new structures, to find how this strategy applies to new structures, and what does that mean, what do you need, who to hire, and then retain talent, of course. As I mentioned before, we are already further developing the next version of the strategy. So there are the first drafting works to find out what the strategy 3.0 would look like. I find it very interesting to progress that. And as we have in this version at the moment, all these aspects of international diplomacy or international aspects, let's say it in general, of course, those have to be further developed in the version 3. And I'm excited to see how that goes on, and will certainly give my input to that. And we also have an internal so-called interest group for cyber international. That is something actually more national, but that's where we actually wanted to make sure as a cyber office that national ideas, or let's say events or operational business that we have specifically in the federal administration, is somehow connected to the international engagement of Switzerland. We do not want to be disconnected, obviously. And, and therefore we have this interest group where we have representatives like from the Federal Office for Justice, from the Federal Police, from the intelligence services, but from a lot of others as well, where we talk what are topics and how such topics could be pursued, engaged in various bodies. So to connect all this. Then international organizations, I show you a bit what is done where, and it gives you perhaps a little view. On UN level, as mentioned at the very beginning, it's about elaborating international norms. There are two, let's say, groups on UN level. One is the group of governmental experts in cyber, and the other is the open-ended working groups regarding cyber. So don't blame me on the title. The true title is very long of these working groups. I don't know it by heart, but there are the two cyber groups. There are only two. So you find it, and there international norms are discussed. So what does it mean that international law applies to cyberspace? How does that reflect in other international norms? What does that mean? How is that done? As you can imagine, there are different ideas. There are different ideas of applying norms to the internet. We have, let's say, I can do a bit of a black and white image. It's always a bit wrong to do, but however, it shows you a bit. There's one idea to really make it decentralized and more let's say, some sort of open and liberal, the net, how it is governed. And then there's the other idea to make it very much regulated and some sort also focused, but then also very, how to say, limited in some ways. And as technically, you can do basically everything you want in the end. That is not a technical discussion. This is a discussion of mindset. This is a discussion of culture. And this is a question of geopolitics as well. We will touch that topic a little bit later. Then we have so-called confidence building. We do it in this on the OECD, the Organization for Security and Collaboration in Europe. And that has a lot to do with how to, in cyberspace, how to make sure that conflicts don't even arise. So that means, for example, that our National Cybersecurity Center, they meet with other national cybersecurities from countries in the EU or somewhere else, so that you know your counterparts and that you know perhaps how to contact them directly and that you know them personally. Because if you see activity, let's say from another country, and you need to get context on that, because context is always everything. What does that mean, this activity? Then it will help you in that very moment where you're under stress, where you're under pressure, where you need to act, where you need to decide. It will help you if you know who to call in that other country, for example. And that helps to lower the bar of let's say, barriers to contact someone because you know them already. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty obvious to do like that, but these are the measures that are among the most efficient ones to actually de-escalate in cyberspace. So completely analog somehow, but it's actually what is doing. Then in the EU, we have regulation going on. You heard that there are different projects going on or even in place regarding cyberspace, cyber regulation. You also heard that the EU used its so-called cyber diplomacy toolbox. That is a norm. That are norms that define how you sanction someone because of malicious activity in cyberspace. And as you could see, that is a public information. There were people and companies from China, Russia, and North Korea that were sanctioned under that regime. Sanctions means financial sanctions and travel sanctions, or travel bans. So you see, the EU is going more a way of regulating on one side and acting on the other side. What is also important is, of course, knowledge exchange, and I make here the example of NATO. Why is this interesting? Because we are not part of that, and however, we are in the network to exchange knowledge. Of course, all the other international organizations do that to some extent as well. Here specifically, we have questions like, what does conflict in cyber mean? Perhaps you heard of the Tallinn manual for cyber warfare. There we have a lot of points that was elaborated together, very interesting. And in the end, it's all about the money and the economy. We have also economic aspects in cyber, and there we have the OECD, for example, where I represent Switzerland. We talk about security of digital products. We talk about warranty of software, warranty of firmware. We discuss such topics where I think it's rather new discussions. We have it since last year's in specific working group. Very excited to be part of that. And I think it shows that actually this world, the digital world, goes in each and every aspect of classical diplomacy and this field of action. Yeah, International Geneva, we had that. We are pretty much engaged in that to promote Geneva as a location for digital and technology debates. I can be short here. I already described it to you. I wanted to mention the Geneva Dialogue on Responsible Behavior in Cyberspace. That is a very successful dialogue. We did more than 10 sessions this year virtually, despite of COVID-19. And we have big players like Swiss Re, UBS, Microsoft, Huawei, and also Kaspersky in it. So you see, despite of the geopolitical climate, which is not so easy sometimes between different countries, that you can read that more or less every day in the newspapers, we have in this dialogue that is done by our office actually in the name of Switzerland, we have very solution-oriented discussions about responsible behavior in cyberspace, so-called good practices. We have representatives of companies from Russia, from the US, and from China, and from Switzerland, and many others working together, solution-oriented, and we are pretty sure that by end of the year we can have such a document that describes what such responsible behavior is on the perspective of those companies. And I think when you look at the climate in the world, how it is, and I'm not talking about the climate outside, then you can see that this is something that is pretty unusual. I was impressed to see that. And new technologies, of course. I mean, Samir knows I could talk about that for hours. I don't do that today. Artificial intelligence, how does that impact the world? I mean, we talk about autonomous weapons. We talk about analytics of data. We talk about decision making, and that has impacts not only on our economies and our daily life, but also on how states to act with each other. We have 5G. You hear it when you're in Switzerland. You hear it about the 5G antennas and people that are not comfortable with that. On an international levels, that's not so much about antennas. It's more about what is the standard, who can influence that, who delivers the hardware for that, what does that mean? Do we face any dangers because of that? And Something that was completely underestimated in the past years, in my view, is technical standardization, like in the ITU, in the 3GPP, and all these bodies, where for long years, always the same people from a very technological world, like engineers, talked together, very great things. They elaborated like technical guidelines that were really exhaustive and strong and reliable and everything. So nothing against that, but point is now such technical standardization debates got a geopolitical impact, because now you do geopolitics by influencing standardization. And that means you suddenly have different stakeholders at the table, and that changes the world and the game here. And that is something we pursue as well, of course. Yes, I wanted to show you what we did this year and last year, and specifically this year, to show a bit that it's not only nice words. So we have these two cyber groups of the UN, the Group of Governmental Experts, GGE, and the Open-Ended Working Group, OEWG. For the GGE, we successfully candidated for that. We do an active participation on positioning of Switzerland in these sometimes very complicated discussions. And in the Open-Ended Working Group, you can imagine this group as being a bit larger because everyone can take part. The GGE is some sort of like invite only. Here in the Open-Ended Working Group, we have the presidency, which is quite a good, let's say, position for Switzerland as a small country. So imagine of that larger working group in the UN regarding cyber, Switzerland is being the chair. That is an interesting position. And we can not only actively participate, but also, of course, our positioning is even more successful there. On OECD, we do the so-called confidence building measures number 3. That's about a secure and reliable communication and de-escalation mechanism between countries. We do that together with Germany. We joined the Freedom Online Coalition, as I mentioned before, and the Geneva Dialogue, as already mentioned, is very successful this year. I'm personally very happy that this works because in the first few months it looked like because of COVID-19 we would need to reschedule, but we took the risk and got everything virtual, and it worked. So what are the challenges? We have domestic challenges. The cyber strategy implementation, that is, I think, a challenge that influences, of course, as well how we as Switzerland do position ourselves in the international world. If we do not have a strategy that works, and if we don't have the structures, then we cannot give many input. Collaboration with the private sector, it's very important to us. That's why we also focused the Geneva Dialogue to a discussion with the private sector. So it's not a discussion from country to country or from states sector to another state sector. It's really together with the private sector. That is something that is sometimes a bit unknown in the very first moment. People don't know how to react to that, but we found nevertheless a lot of openness and a good collaboration. And of course, what something is you can think of is more or less my daily job is combining or bringing together the foreign policy with the domestic policy in regards of cyber. You have internal business, let's say, and you have international aspects, foreign policy aspects, and how to bring together that it gets really something useful in the end. And the international challenges, I think that's perhaps more interesting for you. Digital geopolitics, I touched that already a bit. 5G, who is defining that in the end? What is forbidden? What is allowed? Who buys what hardware? We had that, you saw it in the media. Artificial intelligence, who is governing that? What is allowed? What is not allowed? What should be done? Do we need to regulate it? Who defines what is the regulation? What is the governance body around that? And also the technical standards. That are challenges that are going on. And we think that it should be multilateral how this is discussed, because it should not be that is just defined by someone in terms of one country. It should be a multilateral discussion. Behavior in cyberspace, it's not only about companies, what the best practices is, it's cyber espionage, cyber crime, disinformation. As Switzerland, as a democratic country, we value what that means, democracy, that has to do with information, that has to do with trust, trust in the system. You see at the moment in the US how lack of trust can be very impactful for a country. And there, when you take all these to the digital and to the cyber domain, that behavior is very important to find out what are our values and how we put this into the digital world. And therefore, we continue the Geneva Dialogue, and we engage in a lot of other forums, like in the Swiss Internet Governance Forum last week, where we talk about how such topics for cybercrime and for disinformation, what the behavior should be of the different actors. And of course, one challenge is to put Geneva as a center of cyber diplomacy, and such debates. That's not like just given. There are other places in the world that are also aiming to be such a center. And we think Switzerland is very well positioned. We do a lot in that regard. So what to remember in a nutshell for you. So in case you didn't take any notes, no worries. I wrote you everything in a nutshell. So what to take away? Perhaps you have very specific interest. However, important to know, Switzerland is pursuing its interest not only in an analog offline world, but also in the cyberspace. And we are pretty much engaged in international cyber diplomacy at the moment, especially on UN level. And I think that really may be mentioned because it's something that is not very known. We see that international cooperation is crucial for cybersecurity in Switzerland. That's not an isolated system. We cannot be secure in Switzerland without being interconnected. We see many opportunities, of course, coming from cyber and digital technologies. But first of all, we think the most important thing is a secure, open, free, and rule-based cyberspace for all the users in the net, in the cyberspace. That is a foundation of a lot of other topics I mentioned. And we are very much committed to promote that and to work in that field, also if sometimes it's not an easy way to go. But enough from me. I hope you're not all asleep, and time for your questions, your ideas, and your feedback. Thank you again, Samuel.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was really, really interesting also for me, for our audience. We have several questions. If you would like, I can start with questions.
Yes.
Yeah. First off, I just take some notes for the questions, and I will read also from here. The question is cybersecurity a human right? Can we think about it in the future? For now, sure, it's not. Privacy is recently ongoing process as a human right in Europe, but it will be the main measures, how can I say, a human right issue, the cyber attack in the future. And recently we have seen that in Germany, in a state hospital, a patient died because of cyber attack. And can we count it as a human right in the future or near future?
Well, yeah, I have no clue how this will evolve, honestly, but I mean, this world is so different. But what we see is perhaps two things. We see that quite a lot of known human rights and constructions we know already, like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, those are certainly also an aspect of cyberspace and are to some extent, in my view, also aspects of cybersecurity in the end. The question will be, how much is that possible to cover everything with that? I'm not sure if that is completely possible. However, I think what we will see is at least a more cyber-specific application of existing human rights. I'm not sure if like new human rights will be invented and evolved. If that happens, it will take quite a lot of time, I'm pretty sure. However, I think the first step that will be done is to apply existing concepts, existing norms, and existing rights to the digital domain.
Good, thank you very much. The second question is about the security related to the cyber diplomacy. What does it mean for us or the security of our world? We know that the wars are not anymore with weapons. Now it's with computer and mobile phones and IoT devices. What does it mean in the future? Are we secure as a human of the planet?
Well, I think what it changes is actually, if you're talking about war as being the most extreme part of exercising power from one country to another, is certainly that the cyberspace is a new battlefield, if you want to state it like that. It's a new field of action for war, but perhaps war is already the extreme example. I think what changes is also what is happening before it is a war. All these activities that are not yet acts of war, but they are just under the bar of being act of war. And the cyberspace makes this obviously easier. And it's very hard to attribute who did what and what actually happened in cyberspace and when did it happen. You see it with already easy examples like attacking a single isolated hospital in Germany by obviously cyber criminals. It's already pretty hard to find out what actually worked, what happened there, who was that, and how. And imagine this on a state level. And this makes it, let's say, this makes it an absolute must that we do diplomacy also in that field, because diplomacy as is remains, of course, the self itself. It's still the same people in that domain, but it has other means. It has another field of action. And you need, at least basically, and that's why we do a lot of capacity building internally, you need to understand that field on a basic level, because otherwise you cannot find solutions. And the solutions could be, and you mentioned that, are we safe? Potentially not. It depends on the case. But what can we do to be safe? What can we do that in a very, let's say, dangerous situation, nothing goes wrong? And that's why we do confidence building measures, among other measures. How to build confidence between states, to share information, share knowledge, and also to be able to make a phone call instead of escalating a conflict, for example. It seems pretty simple, I know,
yeah,
but the simple solution works. That's always what. Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel. And you just mentioned that disinformation or information war. And recently we see that there are some ongoing war in the world in Caucasia, and the countries, they use the fake photos, videos. This is disinformation and this is information war. Is there any body in the world or any organization that they regulate this sector, this information or information war, that, hey, you shouldn't use this fake information, like tech giants? Maybe it's going mainly through Facebook, Twitter, and Google. Maybe deep faking technology can stop this war. Do you think that there is the regulator or monitoring organization or body in the world?
No, there's certainly not an international body I would know that regulates that and has the power to like stop that. That's certainly nothing that exists now. That potentially something, when talking about internet governance, about digital governance, about all this, that may be something in the very future that comes. I don't know. Certainly here we have one aspect of responsible behavior, and that would then be not so much towards companies but more towards state or state actors. If it's possible to elaborate such best practices, at least, or norms, that would be, of course, one way. But what you mentioned, even more important, and you mentioned correctly, we have completely other stakeholders at the table. We have Facebook, we have Google at the web. They are not states. They don't have ambassadors in terms of diplomats. They are not part of the UN. So how to get inside that? And that's exactly what I meant. That is a different world. You cannot just copy paste it. It's different. You talk with different people. You talk about technology and war. If we talk about this, because that's always the most exciting topic and the most illustrating one. that is something that works in a different way in that domain, and that's why we need confidence built, among others. That's why we need discussions and dialogues. And it may all sound pretty like, yeah, that's weak and that's not a strong solution, but that is the solution that works in the end. The other solution would potentially be, for example, and you see it in some examples in the US, to like forbid platforms, like to shut down Facebook. Then you have no fake news on them. Potentially, you would just that would just imply that another platform would then be there. But do we really want to do that? Do we want to take away our freedom of expression just because of that? That are things that are hard. I mean. But you're right. I would say we are sometimes safer than we think, but in the most times we are not so safe.
Thanks. And when we look at the cyber crimes, we see cyber espionage by private sector and state nations. We see the attacks, we see ransom attacks, ransomware attacks, we see also disinformation. Is there any cyber police in the world, like maybe Interpol or Europol or international courts, that they will find the states or the big giant companies that doing cyber crimes?
Of course, you see a lot of collaboration, international collaboration. You mentioned it, Interpol, for example. Certainly, cybercrime, organized cybercrime, is of concern, and they collaborate with a lot of different countries to pursue that, to prosecute that, of course. And in the end, potentially, it depends on what the crime is. It may be also an international criminal court or another court. But however, as criminal law is always geographically limited, normally to the country where it was, where it happened, for example, then you normally end up in having several cases. That is also what it's making it, in reality, pretty complicated to go to prosecute cybercrime, because you end up in being together like 15 countries, and in the end you battle who will make the process or not. And I think that are that are certainly topics that are also of discussion. How can this be better in the future? Yeah.
Good, great. And as you mentioned, that Switzerland is going to be cyber hub of the world, especially Geneva. And for that, not only the government, also private sector and the non-government organizations should collaborate together. And yes. You are an advisor board member of Swiss Cyber Forum, and we are a private company. What would you advise for private organizations that to bring some, how can I say, salt to the table on this purpose? What we have to do that Switzerland will be a real cyber hub of the world, security hub?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. There are a lot of possibilities. First, be innovative, be motivated as you have been already. I mean, the innovation power of Switzerland is something that impresses also very, very large countries of the world, because they can simply not really compete with that. So I think that is a let's say a selling factor, if you want, already. So that is certainly something. But and never forget that I, as you mentioned in the very beginning, I worked in consulting. I worked for international firms in different countries. In never any country, and I also worked in our neighborhood countries, neighbors. No other countries, the administration, whether it's cantonal or federal, is so near and can be contacted so easy. We get quite some inquiries about discussions, about invitations, or they ask if they may participate in forums like the platform Tripartite, which is done by the Ofcom, where we talk about ethics and AI, for example, which is open, not for the public itself in terms, but it's open for companies to join. It's open for civil society actors to join. I mean, sometimes even for us, it's difficult who to ask to join, because there's so many, and we do that often. Be open. I mean, contact us, contact me, and we will find where you can go. Try to take part in in conferences that you see. There are a lot of public conferences. For example, one public conference also perhaps interesting for you and for the audience is from the Cyber Defense Campus that is on 3rd and 4th November, where we talk about different aspects of cyber. We talk about privacy, we talk about technology. It's 2 days, fully packed. You can attend physically or virtually. I mean, why not? And there you will certainly stumble upon people that are in this domain. And that is something I would suggest you to check. For example, and then you make these contacts. Yeah, thank you. You shared it here.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
If you go Cyber Defense Campus, if you go down a bit, scroll down a bit, yes, just a bit, and you will see here, yeah, the campus conference. Ah, you missed it. Just up, bit up, scroll up, just a bit more. Here, in the middle.
It's here.
Yeah, that's here, the Cyber Defense Campus Conference. And I think that is an interesting one. For example, check such sites, go to that. And of course, we are a country which is democratic. You have your cantonal national councillors or your state councillors. You can approach them to bring in such topics. You can ask them where you can get engaged. There are also a lot of cantonal bodies, ideas, and let's say hubs. For example, in Zug, they do a lot in terms of crypto, but also in Zurich, AI, and where you can join. I think we have that very really fantastic situation in Switzerland that you can really do that. I mean, I had the same idea to contact and to get in touch with the government on a federal level in a country, one of our neighbor country, and it was completely impossible. I mean, they refuse to talk to you because you're a company. And I mean, that's not to blame them. It just shows that there is another mindset, and we have that mindset in Switzerland. And do it.
Perfect. Yeah, Switzerland is neutral, direct democracy, and open to everyone. That's why it's a great place to make business and make it security hub of the world. So we are talking about the security, and recently we have seen the Swiss Parliament has approved a new data protection law. Is there an expected cyber law in Switzerland will come into force in near future? Do you think that that's something should be processed for Switzerland, because without law and regulations, it will be difficult to be a hub of the world?
Yeah, there are different ways to go. In Switzerland, we also pursue the idea, and I think pretty successfully, that we do not want to over-regulate, that we just regulate what needs to be regulated, and the rest is more like common sense, which applies. And I think that's pretty successful. However, cyberspace, cybersecurity, cybercrime are certainly topics that are also of concern, that bear some risks. And always, if there are risks, then it's the question if the state should act. What we see is there are adoptions of the data protection law. You just saw it. It is now in terms of being enacted. You see the final text. It got much more technological. It got much more in up to speed with standards like the GDPR, for example. It included, for example, automated decision making, something we didn't have before, which is certainly something influenced by technology. Then we have pretty new since July, potentially you don't know it already, or not all of the audience. It is we have the ordinance about cyber risks, which defines who on a federal level is in charge for the federal administration to take on those risks and to minimize them. I think that could be perhaps also a good idea or good inspiration for if you want to do that on a cantonal level, just as an idea. Then we have, of course, the criminal law and the criminal procedural law, but also keep in mind that we just had the civil laws adapted to cryptocurrencies. And I think what we do in Switzerland is perhaps, at least at the moment, I see there's not so much of enacting a cyber law, but perhaps adapting existing other laws in that field to make it fit for cyber and digital world. I think that's at the moment the way I think we should go.
Super. Thank you very much, Daniel. There's another question. Does Switzerland take interest or get inspiration direct from another diplomatic organizations like actors like United States or European Union? Or is everything made in-house? Is it Swiss made, the diplomacy we are talking about, or we get inspiration from the world? Best
No, I mean,
practice.
yeah, of course we are inspired by others. I mean, we have discussions with other countries. We have formal discussions. We have informal discussions. We know each other. We share publications. We share. I got some month ago. Was it a cybersecurity strategy? A leaflet from Australia where they put together their whole cyber strategy in some sort of like a comic, and that's really great. I mean, that inspires us. Perhaps also to find out how to make this more visible, more tangible for the broader public, what that means. And of course, we talk with other states, how they do it, what are the fundamental points in such strategies, what they want to achieve. Sometimes they even go much further than our strategy. They even implement like technical standards in it. We didn't want to go so far. However, of course, we see what they do, how they do it. In the end, it's still a Swiss document because we have to adapt it, for example, to our federal concept of with the different cantons. We have to make it interconnected between the communities, the cantons, and the federal government, the civil society, and also the economy, of course. That's sometimes an aspect we do not see in all of the other strategies. Sometimes they're pretty much more like administration focused or very defense focused. That's not wrong at all. However, we have more the idea that we want to do it more overarching. And I think that is, when you look at the very first national strategy we had, that was indeed, the first national cyber strategy was indeed more targeted towards the federal government, which was the scope to do that at that time.
Yes.
It was really the scope to just scope at the federal government. It's not wrong, but obviously, and that was also the criticism, which I completely understand, is, okay, that's a bit isolated. How will that work? And so in the next version that you will that is now in force at the moment, you see this collaboration. And I think in the third version we see even more of that. We see even more technology, we see even more universities, and we see even more international aspects of that. So I would say we take the best learnings from what we see and put this in a way that it is doable for and feasible for Switzerland. Yeah.
Great. Maybe this is my last question, Daniel. We are talking the role of Switzerland, cyber diplomacy. Do you think that Switzerland right now has the potential to be a cyber mediator between two state nations that they use cyber attacks against each other?
Potentially, we could. I mean, we do that already in the physical world. That we do that. Sometimes that is engagement that is visible and public, and sometimes not. However, I see that doing this in the cyber domain is challenging, is complicated, raises a lot of questions, would require a lot of knowledge and means also on our side. But I think as Switzerland, why not we? We do it already in the traditional world, in the physical world. I think we could do that, and I think we should, if we can make the world safer with that, we should do that.
Good. Okay, last question is there. How important is the artificial intelligence for the Swiss cyber diplomacy program, or that what is Switzerland's position on regulated AI?
Okay, yeah, we have a position on that. And by the way, we are just finalizing so-called guidelines for AI. Those guidelines will be enacted by the Federal Council, and they are targeted to the federal administration only in terms of, that's no regulation of AI in Switzerland, so don't get me wrong, but it's a definition of guidelines, best practices, and also values, which we as a federal government do respect when we use or apply AI. Now, what does that mean? Of course, those values we have in there are not completely isolated and completely only applicable to the federal government. You see, for example, that AI needs to be human-centric. Human needs to be first. Then we need transparency, for example. That's also in privacy, we talk a lot about transparency and accountability. Those are topics. And AI is an important factor of such technology, cyber discussions. We have different forums where this is discussed. For example, autonomous weapons. Autonomous weapon systems has a lot to do with AI, with machine learning. What does that mean? Who is in charge of that? Who is responsible? What can you do against it? Is a kill switch in it? Can you stop that machine? Stuff, all that. So we have a lot of that, and depending on which specific topic you have, you talk about that more in the defense sector, more in the civil sector, more in the legal sector, privacy, and also disinformation you mentioned is also something, AI, deep fakes, all this, how to apply this, what are the rules? Yes, so this is a topic, this is something we talk about, and we also look at what is happening in the world as well. You see in the EU, you see the OECD made a white paper for artificial intelligence. That is perhaps in contrast to the guidelines we're just doing, which is for the government. It's the OECD has a more like an economical standpoint, which is great. I mean, we need to put all this together, and then we see what we need to regulate and how that can be regulated. I'm personally thinking that we will see aspects of AI that will be regulated. I don't know if we have an AI law in the end, but honestly, I'm not sure if it is important to have an AI law or not. I think the important part is to find out, for example, regarding privacy. I think that is already pretty much good in the new version of the data protection law. So we don't need another law to describe this, but let's see how this evolves. However, I think, yes, we will see regulation in that field. In the EU, in the world, we will perhaps even see a regulatory body, I don't know. But yes, that's the way we will potentially see.
So thank you very much, Daniel. I think we had enough time for the questions, and we are already over time, to almost 15 minutes. And thank you very much to our audience. Everyone's still staying here, and I would like to invite you to visit our homepage again. We have another events and webinars on site and offline events. It will be our pleasure to host you again. And Daniel, thanks a lot, and stay safe. We will see each other very soon again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody. It was a great session. Stay safe. See you next time.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.